I have an absolutely fascinating vintage crime story for you today, a story that has been mostly forgotten to time. I don't want this story to be forgotten because this is a horrifying crime committed by a man whose motives remain a mystery to this day. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a home built into the hills of Wisconsin, where genius could live unbothered and love might flourish beyond the reach of scandal. Frank Lloyd Wright called it Taliesin. To him, it was more than a house. It was a statement of freedom. But on a warm August afternoon in 1914, the dream dissolved in a flash of fire and blood. A man once trusted in the household walked calmly among its residents with a hatchet in his hand and kerosene at the ready. By the day's end, 7 people were dead. Wright's great love lay butchered on the floor, and Taliesin stood blackened and broken against the sky. Most of us know Frank Lloyd Wright as the famous architect, but he also endured a lot of tragedy, and this is the story of the massacre at Taliesin. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Frank Lloyd Wright was born in 1867 in Richland Center, Wisconsin. His childhood was marked by strict parents and a sense of destiny instilled by his mother, Anna Lloyd Jones, of Welsh descent, who claimed her son would build beautiful buildings one day. She filled his childhood with geometric toys and told him he was meant for greatness, and Frank Lloyd Wright carried that conviction his entire life. By his early 20s, he was already making a name for himself in Chicago. Under the mentorship of Louis Sullivan, Wright developed his signature style: open interiors, natural light, and horizontal lines that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. He called it prairie school architecture. Jason introduced me to Frank Lloyd Wright as he introduced me to a lot of things. He has always been a huge fan of the work, and I became a huge fan of the work. If I could have my dream house, it would look very much like a Frank Lloyd Wright house. In 1889, Wright married Catherine Kitty Tobin. Together they had 6 children. For 2 decades, he balanced his thriving career with family life in Oak Park, Illinois. Outwardly, Wright was the picture of success, a respected architect, a husband, a father. But beneath the surface, he chafed against domesticity. Wright once admitted he was, quote, unfit for the drudgery of fidelity. And soon, he proved it. In 1903, Wright took a commission to design a house for Edwin and Mamah Borthwick Cheney. Edwin was an engineer. Mamah, his wife, was educated, literary, and independent-minded, rare qualities for a woman of her time. As Wright designed the Cheney home, he fell deeply in love with Mamah, and the two began an affair. By 1909, the attraction could no longer be contained. Both Wright and Mamah abandoned their spouses and families, fleeing to Europe together. It was a scandal that rocked polite society. The press pounced. Newspapers labeled Wright immoral, a destroyer of homes. His reputation as a family man crumbled overnight. Wright, never one to bend to convention, dismissed the outrage. He said, 2 people of understanding found one another, and Mamah became his muse. She encouraged his writing, challenged his ideas, and in her he found a partner who seemed to match his sense of destiny. But they needed a place to live outside the glare of scandal. Wright's solution would give birth to one of the darkest chapters in his life. In 1911, Wright returned to the rolling hills of southwestern Wisconsin to land owned by his mother's family near Spring Green. There, he began building a house he called Taliesin. The name came from a Welsh bard and meant shining brow. The house was not just a home, it was an experiment in living architecture. Low horizontal lines hugged the earth, long terraces opened to the landscape. Wright believed buildings should live in harmony with nature, and Taliesin was his boldest statement yet. Here he intended to live freely with Mamah, away from the moral judgment of Oak Park. She moved in with him, bringing her 2 children, John and Martha. While society condemned them, Wright and Mamah envisioned Taliesin as a retreat where creativity and love could flourish. But while Taliesin rose in beauty, it was never entirely peaceful. The scandal lingered. Wright was often away on commissions, leaving Mamah to run the household. And within the walls of Taliesin, a new, darker presence appeared, one that would one day set the house ablaze. In 1913, Frank and Mamah hired a man named Julian Carlton to work at Taliesin. He was a servant, a handyman, and a cook. Carlton was from Barbados, in his 30s, and worked alongside his wife Gertrude, who was hired as a maid. At first, Carlton appeared competent. He dressed sharply, carried himself with pride, and seemed diligent in his duties. Wright himself was not particularly close to Carlton. The architect was often away, like I said, but Mamah came to rely on the couple's help. Yet soon, stories began to circulate. Carlton was often described by others as strange. He was even menacing at times. He was intensely protective of his wife Gertrude, quick to perceive slights, and prone to angry mutterings. In the summer of 1914, Carlton's behavior grew worse. He isolated himself, avoiding meals with the other staff. Witnesses claimed he sharpened a hatchet obsessively. Some say he stopped sleeping, staying awake through the night. There were arguments between Carlton and the workers, fueled by his belief that he was being disrespected. Mamah, sensitive to the tension in the house, reportedly suggested dismissing Carlton, but Wright, busy with projects in Chicago, never followed through, and the decision or indecision would prove fatal. By August of 1914, Taliesin was alive with activity. Several draftsmen and carpenters were working there, part of Wright's team. Meals were communal, taken together in the dining area. Mamah and her children settled into a routine while Wright traveled for work. Julian Carlton, though, was unraveling. Days before the tragedy, he told his wife Gertrude they should leave Wisconsin soon. He packed a bag and kept it hidden. He stopped speaking to the other workers. His gaze, once described as proud, now carried something harder to read. A mixture of anger with resolve. What precisely tipped him into violence remains unclear. Some historians suggest he felt isolated, mocked, or unwanted. Others believe paranoia and mental illness had taken hold. But what is certain is that Carlton was planning something. He had both a weapon and fuel ready. On the morning of August 15th, Carlton rose early. He moved about Taliesin quietly, almost ceremonially. By midday, when the household gathered for lunch, he was ready to act. The dining porch of Taliesin looked out over the green Wisconsin hills. That day, Mamah sat with her children, John and Martha. Several draftsmen and carpenters joined them. Emil Brodell, William Weston, and Herbert Fritz among them. Julian Carlton served the meal. The soup was ladled into bowls, the house filled with the quiet sounds of clinking spoons. Nothing seemed out of place. Then Carlton stepped outside. When he returned, he carried his hatchet. He moved first towards Mamah. Before anyone could react, he brought the blade down. She collapsed, her children screaming beside her. Carlton turned to them without pause, striking with the same cold precision. John and Martha fell. This attack happened in seconds. He just walked into the house and started chopping people to bits. The table erupted in chaos. Workers scrambled, overturning chairs, trying to reach the doors. Carlton moved swiftly, swinging the hatchet, cutting down those in his path. And then, as if the blood was not enough, he turned to fire. Carlton had prepared cans of kerosene and gasoline. He splashed them through the house and lit a match. Flames caught instantly, climbing the dry wood, sweeping through the rooms. For those trapped inside, the fire became a second weapon. Windows were locked or barred. Heat drove them back. Some tried to smash their way out. Herbert Fritz leaped through a window, his clothes igniting, rolling desperately on the grass outside. Others weren't so fortunate. Within minutes, Wright's sanctuary was an inferno, consumed by both fire and blade. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Taliesin's open design, which once symbolized freedom, now acted as a funnel for smoke and flame. The wooden beams snapped and splintered. The workers who had been eating alongside Mamah and her children were trapped in a death trap of heat, smoke, and a killer waiting at the exits. Mamah Borthwick lay dead or dying on the floor, struck down before she could even rise from her chair. Beside her were her 2 children, John, just 12 years old, and Martha, only 9. Their cries had been silenced in an instant by Carlton's hatchet. Emile Brodel, a young draftsman from Chicago, was struck as he tried to escape the porch. Carlton cut him down with the blade before the flames claimed his body. William Weston, a skilled carpenter, met the same fate. His son, Ernest Weston, only a teenager, was among the workers that day. Ernest survived, but he would never forget the sight of his father's brutal end. Another draftsman, Thomas Brunker, and his son David also perished in the blaze. By the time rescuers arrived, their remains were nearly unrecognizable, consumed by fire. In total, 7 lives were taken in less than an hour. Everyone was affected, but not everyone died. A few men managed to escape the hell Carlton had unleashed. Herbert Fritz, the draftsman, was seated near a window when the fire began. Acting on instinct, he hurled himself through the glass, crashing into the grass outside. His clothes ignited instantly, and he rolled frantically, smothering the flames until he lay bruised and burned, but alive. Ernest Weston, the teenager, ran blindly through the smoke and found an opening. He emerged coughing and staggering, his body scorched but still intact. For those who survived, the horror was not just the fire, but the sound. Screams echoed behind them as others begged for help, only to be consumed by flame or struck down by Carlton's hatchet. The men who escaped carried scars that would never heal. As Taliesin burned, Julian Carlton fled. Witnesses saw him running towards the woods, carrying his hatchet. For hours, there was panic in Spring Green. Some feared he would attack again. Authorities soon began a manhunt. Carlton and his wife Gertrude had been planning to leave Wisconsin, and like I said, he had already packed a bag. But instead of disappearing, he was found crouched in a furnace room on the property, hiding like a cornered animal. When deputies dragged him out, they discovered he had swallowed hydrochloric acid in an attempt to kill himself. His mouth and throat were ravaged, his speech slurred, but he was still alive. I can think of a lot of ways to go, and drinking acid is at the bottom of that list. Carlton was taken to jail, barely able to swallow. He refused to give a motive. Some claimed he muttered about being mistreated. Others suggested paranoia or delusion had driven him. But his silence left the truth buried. Within weeks, Carlton wasted away, unable to eat, starving to death in custody. The tragedy of Taliesin was not just architectural loss, it was human. 7 people, each with their own lives and futures, died that day. At only 45, Mamah Borthwick Cheney had left behind her reputation, her marriage, and her safety to live with Wright. She was educated, fluent in multiple languages, and deeply committed to women's rights. To Frank Lloyd Wright, she was more than a lover. She was his intellectual equal. Her death was the deepest wound to him. Mamah's children, caught in the crossfire of adult scandal and madness, died by their mother. At just 12 and 9 years old, their young lives ended violently in the place meant to be their home. Emile Brodel was cut down in his 20s before his career could bloom. William Weston was a skilled carpenter, trusted personally by Frank Lloyd Wright. He was slain while trying to provide for his family. Thomas and David Brunker, father and son, both carpenters, lost their life that day, victims of the fire that Carlton set. Their deaths underscored the cruelty of the day, a family line broken in one afternoon. Their names were printed in newspapers, their funerals mourned quietly in Wisconsin, but in the shadow of Wright's fame, their stories risked being forgotten. Frank Lloyd Wright was in Chicago when news of the massacre reached him. The details were almost too much to comprehend. Can you imagine being away from home and getting this news that your entire staff, your lover, and her 2 children had been hacked to death and then burned. Mamah, the woman he had risked everything for, was butchered, her children dead, and his house destroyed. For days, Frank Lloyd Wright was inconsolable. He rarely spoke of the massacre afterward, but friends say he carried the pain like a hidden scar. The loss of Mamah was described as the darkest moment of his life. But Frank Lloyd Wright was also a man of defiance. Even in the face of devastation, he refused to let Taliesin remain in the ruins. Within months, he began rebuilding. The second version of Taliesin rose from the ashes in 1915. Frank Lloyd Wright rebuilt it on the same land, expanding the design, reclaiming what had been taken. He insisted that creation, not destruction, would define the house. Yet tragedy lingered. Unbelievably, in 1925, a second fire, this time accidental, gutted much of Taliesin once more. Wright, ever stubborn, rebuilt again. By then, whispers circulated that the home was cursed. 2 fires, 7 murders, endless scandal. But Wright would not surrender. Taliesin remained his sanctuary, his workshop, and later his school for apprentices. To Wright, the rebuilding was symbolic. Architecture, he believed, was eternal. Lives might be lost, reputation shattered, but buildings could rise again. Taliesin became a testament to that philosophy and a reminder of what he had endured. Julian Carlton left behind no explanation. His motives remain speculation, a mix of paranoia, anger, resentment. In his silence, he became a figure of terror, defined only by destruction. For Wright, Taliesin was both triumph and torment. He continued to design masterpieces, the gem in the crown, of course, being Falling Water, but also the Guggenheim Museum. Taliesin's dark history never disappeared. Visitors still talk about the fire, the murders, the blood spilled in a house built for love. More than a century later, Taliesin stands in Spring Green. It is preserved as a historic site, open to tours. And I'm going to go there one day. I would love to see it myself. Guides speak of Wright's genius, his designs, and his philosophy, but the walls remember August 15th, 1914, when architecture met atrocity. The story still lives in people's memories, and from time to time, not very often, but sometimes, this massacre is still discussed.
A torrid affair followed by a mass murder.
Kind of sounds like something out of a crime show, but it actually happened 100 years ago at a place that's become a huge tourist attraction. Shannon Sims is here once again to tell us about a little-known crime involving Wisconsin's most famous architect. Shannon?
Taliesin, the sprawling estate built by famed architect Frank Lloyd Wright in 1911, draws thousands of tourists in tiny Spring Green, Wisconsin every year. But many people probably don't know the dark history behind the serene surface. Frank Lloyd Wright's masterful estate, Taliesin, is a thing of beauty.
He was very interested in location as a source for his architecture.
Built in a hillside, you almost feel like a part of nature.
The thing that makes it such an amazing location is primarily this sense of floating.
It's hard to believe that on this same site 100 years ago, one of the state's most grisly mass murders occurred.
Nobody really wanted to talk about it or think about it or remember it.
Author Ron McCree has long been intrigued by Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright is actually kind of heroic. He's constantly pushing against the grain of the dominant culture of American life and American values.
A prime example? Wright, who was married, fell for Mamah Borthwick, the wife of one of his clients. Before long, they were lovers.
They both wanted more. They wanted, maybe it was a midlife crisis, but they really fell in love.
Frank built Taliesin as a getaway for himself, Mamah, and her young children.
They were riding high.
That happiness was short-lived. House cook Julian Carlton murdered Mamah, her 2 children, and 4 other workers, and set the estate on fire.
His motive is still unknown. He seems to have become paranoid or feeling oppressed or picked on.
Despite medical attention, Carlton died in a jail just a few weeks later, never revealing his motive. And the damage was done. Wright's Spring Green paradise, a distant memory.
It burned his house down, and it destroyed, at that moment, the love of his life. Of course, the house that we're looking at now is not the house that burned down.
Our tour of Taliesin today includes the room where the murders happened.
That's where, in the past, was where Mamah and her 2 children were having lunch on August 15th, 1914. And this is their cemetery.
Less than a mile from the home is Frank's family cemetery, including Mamah's grave. Sid sees it as a beautiful tribute to a life lost far too soon.
If you stand here and you can look up at Taliesin, it's poignant, not creepy.
While the story behind Taliesin may be tragic, Ron feels it could serve as a life lesson for us all.
How much life can be lived in a few years, and how quickly it can all be blown apart.
Well, as a way to cope with his grief, Wright rebuilt Taliesin right away. But it went up in flames again in 1925 due to faulty wiring, so again, he rebuilt it. The estate was donated to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation after his death in 1959.
The story behind the story of Frank Lloyd Wright
is actually very interesting.
Very much
Fascinating. Thank you, Shannon.
No problem.
Frank Lloyd Wright sought to create a shining brow upon the hill, a sanctuary for love and art. Instead, it became the stage for one of the most shocking mass murders in early American history. 7 lives ended in violence. A family was shattered. A genius was scarred forever. And a house meant to embody harmony with nature became synonymous with blood and ash. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Hey, a story older than me. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. And I am very excited to announce that I am getting ready to launch my second podcast. It will be called 15-Minute Mysteries with Stacy Lee. We are going to do disappearances, vanishings, dark stories with no answers, and medical mysteries. It will be more short-form content that you can consume in little time. I'm excited about it. I've been fine-tuning the theme song the last few days. Don't forget about our fundraiser. If you go to the playlist on my channel called Fundraisers, you can learn all about what our community does to help police departments. I sure appreciate each and every one of you. Your support is the reason that I'm still here. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.